The dust from the evening stage had barely settled when Madeline Vance first laid eyes on Braxton Keane, his silhouette stark against the golden sunset that painted Winnemucca, Nevada like fire in the summer of 1878. She stood on the platform of the newly constructed Central Pacific Railroad station, clutching her carpetbag with white knuckles, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her 22 years by answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher in this remote frontier town. "Miss, you look about as lost as a calf in a sandstorm," came a deep voice that matched the tall figure now approaching her. The man's face was partly obscured by the wide brim of his worn leather hat, but his eyes, clear blue as a mountain lake, caught her attention immediately. "I'm quite capable of finding my way, sir," Madeline replied, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion that threatened to collapse her 5'4" frame. 18 hours on the train from San Francisco had left her stiff and irritable. The man chuckled, pushing his hat back to reveal a face weathered by sun and wind, yet handsome in its rugged way. "No offense meant, madam, just not many unaccompanied ladies step off the train in Winnemucca unless they're lost or running from something." Madeline felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm neither, I'm the new schoolteacher." His expression shifted from amusement to genuine interest. "Well, that explains it, Braxton Keane." He extended a hand that was calloused and strong. "Most folks just call me Brax." "Madeline Vance," she replied, accepting his handshake briefly before withdrawing her gloved hand. "The schoolhouse isn't expecting you until tomorrow," Brax said, glancing at the setting sun. "Town council asked me to watch for you since I was delivering cattle near the station today. My ranch is just outside town." Madeline felt a flutter of unease. "And am I to understand you're offering accommodations, Mr. Keane?" His laugh was quick and genuine. "No, madam. I'm escorting you to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. She's expecting you, has a room ready and everything." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by embarrassment at her assumption. "I see. Thank you for your kindness." "It's no trouble, may I?" He gestured to her bag, and after a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. As they walked toward the waiting wagon, Madeline took in the town of Winnemucca. Despite the railroad's recent arrival, it retained the raw, unfinished look of a frontier settlement, a main street flanked by wooden buildings, some still sporting fresh lumber while others had weathered to a silvery gray. Men in dusty clothes moved with purpose, acknowledging Brax with nods or quiet greetings. "First time in Nevada territory?" Brax asked as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "Yes, I taught in San Francisco for 2 years after finishing my education." She smoothed her navy traveling dress, suddenly conscious of how out of place its Eastern styling appeared here. San Francisco to Winnemucca is quite a change. He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "What brings you all the way out here?" Madeline hesitated. "The advertisement promised better wages than I was receiving, and—" She paused, deciding against sharing her full reasons. "I was ready for a change of scenery." Brax gave her a sideways glance that suggested he knew there was more to her story, but he simply nodded. "Well, you'll find plenty of scenery here, that's for certain." The wagon lurched forward and Madeline gripped the wooden seat. "The town seems quaint, that's a polite way of putting it," Brax laughed. "It's rough, but it's growing. The railroads changed everything. Before the Central Pacific came through, this was just a small settlement. Now we've got a proper hotel, 3 saloons, and soon a real schoolhouse instead of just using the church on weekdays." As they traveled down the main street, Madeline noticed the curious glances directed her way. Women were clearly a minority here, and a newcomer attracted attention. "Don't mind the staring," Brax said, following her gaze. "New faces are always interesting, especially ones as—" He cleared his throat, "educated as yourself." Madeline couldn't help smiling at his diplomatic choice of words. "I appreciate your gallantry, Mr. Keane, but I'm well aware that a woman traveling alone is subject to scrutiny." "Call me Brax," he offered. "Everyone does." "That would be improper, Mr. Keane. We've only just met." Fair enough, he conceded with a grin that transformed his face, erasing years of hardship in an instant. Though I reckon propriety means something different out here than it does in San Francisco. They arrived at a two-story clapboard house set slightly apart from the businesses of the main street. A wooden sign reading Holloway Boarding House hung from the porch. "Here we are," Brax announced, stopping the wagon. "Mrs. Holloway runs the cleanest boarding house in town. She's strict about gentlemen callers and curfews, but she cooks the best biscuits this side of the Sierras." He jumped down and offered Madeline his hand. She hesitated only briefly before accepting his assistance, acutely aware of his strength as he easily helped her down. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Keane." "My pleasure, Miss Vance." He retrieved her bag from the wagon. "The town council meeting is tomorrow at 4. They'll want to meet you before you start teaching on Monday." "I'll be prepared," she assured him, taking her bag and noticing the way his gaze lingered on her face. "I don't doubt that," he replied softly. Something in his tone made her heart beat a little faster, and she quickly looked away. The door of the boarding house opened, revealing a plump woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. "You must be Miss Vance. I'm Eleanor Holloway. We've been expecting you." "Good evening, Mrs. Holloway," Madeline greeted, grateful for the interruption. "Evening, Mrs. Holloway." Brax tipped his hat. "Delivering your new boarder safe and sound." "Thank you, Braxton," Mrs. Holloway replied with the familiarity of long acquaintance. "Will you be joining us for supper?" "Not tonight, madam. Got to get back to the ranch before dark." Mrs. Holloway nodded and turned to Madeline. "Come in, dear. You must be exhausted from your journey." "I'll see you around, Miss Vance," Brax said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that caught her off guard. "Good evening, Mr. Keane." Madeline nodded politely, then followed Mrs. Holloway inside, aware of his gaze on her back until the door closed behind them. The interior of the boarding house was surprisingly refined, with actual wallpaper and polished furniture that spoke of Mrs. Holloway's Eastern origins. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Mrs. Holloway informed her. "Supper will be served in half an hour. There are 2 other boarders at present, Dr. Miller and Mr. Simmons, the bank clerk. Both are gentlemen of good character." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I appreciate your hospitality. Braxton Keane brought you from the station?" The older woman asked casually as she led Madeline upstairs. "Yes, he mentioned the town council had asked him to meet me," Mrs. Holloway nodded. "He's on the council himself, owns the largest cattle ranch in the county. A good man, despite appearances. Despite appearances." The landlady smiled knowingly. "He looks every inch the rough cowboy, and he can be when need arises, but Braxton has more education than most in these parts. His father was a successful rancher in Texas before the war, sent him east to school before." She hesitated, before tragedy struck. "He came west on his own at 18, built everything from nothing." Madeline tried not to show her curiosity. "That's quite impressive." "It is indeed. Here's your room, Mrs. Holloway opened the door to reveal a small but clean chamber with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "I'll leave you to freshen up before supper." Alone at last, Madeline sank onto the bed, her mind full of impressions of her new home and, despite her best intentions, of the blue-eyed rancher with the complex past. Madeline's first week in Winnemucca passed in a blur of introductions and adjustments. The town council, consisting of the mayor, the local doctor, the banker, a shopkeeper, and Braxton Keane, had approved her appointment with little discussion, seemingly relieved to have found a qualified teacher willing to come to their remote town. The schoolhouse was a single-room building that had previously served as the town's first church, before a larger one was built. 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age greeted her on her first day, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, outright defiance. By Friday afternoon, as she dismissed the children, Madeline felt both exhausted and satisfied. She'd managed to establish some semblance of order, and had begun evaluating each student's abilities, which varied wildly. Some of the older boys, clearly accustomed to working alongside their fathers, resisted her authority, but she'd faced similar challenges in San Francisco. As she erased the chalkboard, the door opened behind her. Turning, she found Braxton Keane filling the doorway, hat in hand. "Mr. Keane," she acknowledged, surprised by his presence and by the immediate quickening of her pulse. "Miss Vance," he nodded. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. I was just finishing for the day." He stepped inside, looking around the schoolroom with interest. "How was your first week?" "Educational," she replied with a small smile. "For me as much as for the students, I suspect. Giving you trouble?" His tone was light, but his eyes were assessing. "Nothing I can't handle." She set down the eraser and dusted chalk from her hands. "Did you need something, Mr. Keane?" He hesitated, unusual for a man who seemed so self-assured. "I'm here on council business, actually. The town's holding a harvest dance tomorrow night at the new hotel. Sort of a tradition, but also a fundraiser for the school. As the teacher, your presence would be appreciated." "I see." Madeline considered. A social gathering would be an opportunity to meet more of the community, though the prospect of a frontier dance made her slightly nervous. "Is it a formal affair?" Brax chuckled. "By Winnemucca standards, yes. Ladies wear their Sunday best, men might dust off their boots." "Then I shall plan to attend," she decided. "Thank you for the invitation," he nodded, but didn't immediately leave. Instead, he moved further into the room, examining the books she'd arranged on a shelf. "These all yours?" he asked, running a finger along the spine of a volume of Shakespeare. "Some are, others were already here. The selection is limited." "I might have some books at the ranch you could use," he offered. "Nothing fancy, but some classics, history. My father believed in education." Madeline studied him with new interest. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you were educated back east." Something flickered in his expression, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "For a time, Virginia didn't finish, because of the war, among other things." His tone discouraged further questions. He gestured to the classroom. "You've made improvements already." Accepting the change of subject, Madeline nodded. "The children deserve a proper learning environment. I've requested maps and additional readers from the council budget." "I'll make sure you get them," he promised. Then, with apparent casualness, he added, "If you haven't made arrangements for the dance yet, I'd be happy to escort you." The offer caught her off guard. "That's very kind, but just as neighbors," he clarified quickly. "Save you walking alone after dark." Madeline hesitated. Accepting might create gossip, but refusing seemed unnecessarily prim. "Thank you, Mr. Keane, that would be lovely." His smile was genuine. "I'll call for you at 7 then." After he left, Madeline sat at her desk, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. She'd come to Winnemucca partly to escape the aftermath of a broken engagement. William had proven himself both unfaithful and interested primarily in her small inheritance from her grandmother. The last thing she needed was entanglement with another man, especially one whose life was so firmly rooted in this frontier town when she herself wasn't certain how long she would stay. Yet there was something about Braxton Keane that intrigued her, a combination of frontier ruggedness and unexpected depth that made her want to know more. The harvest dance exceeded Madeline's expectations. The hotel's dining room had been transformed with autumn decorations. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band of local musicians played with surprising skill. The town's residents had indeed dressed in their finest, with women in colorful dresses and men in clean shirts and polished boots. Brax arrived at the boarding house precisely at 7, wearing a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders remarkably well, though he looked less comfortable in it than in his usual working clothes. Madeline had chosen her best dress, forest green silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she descended the stairs, his direct gaze making her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Keane." His laugh was low and pleasant. "Don't get used to it." This suit only comes out for weddings, funerals, and harvest dances." At the hotel, Madeline found herself continuously introduced to townspeople she hadn't yet met. Most were welcoming, though she noticed a few of the local women eyeing her with barely disguised suspicion when Brax remained attentively by her side. "Miss Bennet doesn't seem to approve of me," Madeline observed quietly after a particularly frosty introduction to the unmarried daughter of the general store owner. Brax followed her gaze and smirked. "Clara's been setting her cap for half the eligible men in the county for years." "Pay her no mind. And are you among those eligible men she's pursued?" Madeline asked before she could stop herself. His eyes danced with amusement. "I might have been once upon a time, but Clara and I wouldn't suit, and she knows it." He offered his arm as the band began a new tune. "May I have this dance, Miss Vance?" Madeline hesitated. "I should warn you I'm not particularly accomplished." "That makes two of us," he replied. "We'll muddle through together." The dance was a simple waltz, and despite his self-deprecation, Brax proved to be a competent partner, guiding her confidently around the floor. Madeline was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him despite his formal attire, and the way his eyes rarely left her face. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Keane," she said as they moved together. "Cattle rancher, town councilman, and now a dancer." "I'm just a man trying to make something of himself in a hard country," he replied, more serious than she'd expected. "And what about you, Miss Vance? What brings a refined lady like yourself to the Nevada frontier?" "Perhaps I'm seeking adventure," she suggested lightly. "Is that all?" His gaze was too perceptive. "Most women seeking adventure don't choose teaching in a dusty town like Winnemucca." The music ended before she could form a response, and they were soon separated as other partners claimed dances. Madeline found herself partnered with several of the town's men, including the young bank clerk, the doctor, and the mayor. She noticed Brax dancing with various ladies, including the persistent Clara Bennet, but his eyes frequently sought Madeline across the room. Later in the evening, as the celebration continued, Brax found her again. "Getting late," he observed. "Would you like me to take you back to Mrs. Holloway's, or are you enjoying yourself too much to leave?" "I should probably return," Madeline admitted. "The children have worn me out this week, I'm afraid." Outside, the night was clear and cool, with stars scattered across the black velvet sky like diamonds. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "Thank you for escorting me," Madeline said as they approached the boarding house. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." "High praise," Brax teased. "I'm glad you came to Winnemucca, Miss Vance." They reached the porch, and Madeline turned to face him. "Even though you know nothing about me." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know you're patient with the children, even the difficult ones. I know you're brave enough to travel alone across the country for a teaching position in a town you'd never seen. And I know you dance like you've got music inside you, even when you claim not to be accomplished." His words left her momentarily speechless. "Mr. Keane, call me Brax," he interrupted gently. "Please, Brax," she conceded, the name feeling intimate on her lips. "I think perhaps you see what you wish to see." "No," he shook his head. "I just see you, Madeline." The sound of her given name and his deep voice sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Good night, Brax," she said, suddenly needing distance from the intensity of his gaze. "Good night." He waited until she was safely inside before turning away. Madeline leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. This was not what she had planned when she accepted the position in Winnemucca. She'd come to escape, to heal, to rebuild her confidence after William's betrayal. Becoming attached to another man, especially one so firmly rooted in this frontier town, would only complicate her carefully constructed future. Yet as she climbed the stairs to her room, she couldn't deny that Braxton Keane had already begun to occupy a space in her thoughts that she hadn't intended to give anyone. The weeks that followed settled into a routine. Madeline taught during the day, often staying late to help struggling students or prepare lessons. Twice a week, she took supper with Mrs. Holloway and her boarders, listening to Dr. Miller's stories of frontier medicine or Mr. Simmons' careful explanations of banking regulations. On Sundays, she attended the small Methodist church, where her presence was noted and appreciated by the minister's wife, who promptly recruited her for the church choir. Brax appeared regularly in her life, sometimes formally, as when the town council met to discuss school matters, and sometimes unexpectedly, as when he delivered a crate of books to the schoolhouse one afternoon. These were gathering dust at the ranch, he explained as Madeline exclaimed over the volumes. Figured they'd do more good here. The collection included history texts, poetry anthologies, and several novels that would be perfect for her older students. This is incredibly generous, she said, running her fingers over a leather-bound edition of Dickens. Are you certain you want to part with them? I've read them all, he shrugged. Some more than once, now others can benefit. That evening, as October gave way to November and the air carried the first hints of winter, Brax invited her to ride with him to see the countryside before snow arrived. Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow but made no objection when Madeline accepted. Brax arrived on Sunday afternoon with 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle bay mare for Madeline. She belongs to my foreman's daughter, but she's away visiting relatives in California, he explained. Thought you might prefer a side saddle. Madeline, who had ridden occasionally in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, was grateful for his consideration. They rode west of town, following a well-worn trail that wound through sagebrush-covered hills. My ranch is about 5 miles that way, Brax pointed north as they reached higher ground. Started with 40 acres and 3 cows 12 years ago, now it's over 2,000 acres. That's remarkable, Madeline said sincerely. You must be very proud. I am, he admitted without false modesty. It's not the biggest spread in Nevada, but it's mine, built with my own hands and sweat. He turned in the saddle to look at her. What about your family, Madeline? You never speak of them. She hesitated, then decided there was little harm in sharing the basic facts. My parents died when I was 16, influenza. I lived with my grandmother in Boston until she passed 2 years ago, then moved to San Francisco, where a distant cousin had offered me a teaching position. I'm sorry about your parents, he said, genuine sympathy in his voice. It's not easy losing family young. You sound as if you speak from experience. Brax nodded, his gaze distant. My mother died when I was 10. My father sent me east to school when I was 14, wanting me to have advantages he never had, but then the war came. He paused, and Madeline sensed he was deciding how much to reveal. I was 16 when Fort Sumter was fired upon, too young to enlist, though many did. My school in Virginia emptied of older boys than teachers. By 63, I couldn't stand it anymore. I ran away, tried to join the Confederate Army. Madeline tried to imagine him as a boy, caught in the terrible divisions of the war. Did they take you? No, he smiled grimly. Caught me lying about my age, sent me home to my aunt in Richmond. That's when we got word about my father. Union soldiers had raided our ranch in Texas. He resisted. They shot him, burned everything. Oh, Brax, Madeline breathed. How awful. War is awful, he said simply. When it ended, there was nothing to go back to in Texas. My aunt had lost everything in Richmond. I headed west with what little money I had left, worked cattle drives, saved every penny. Bought my first piece of land when I was 20. They had stopped on a ridge overlooking a valley where the Humboldt River wound its way through the landscape like a silver ribbon. The beauty of the scene contrasted sharply with the painful history Brax had just shared. Thank you for telling me, Madeline said quietly. He studied her face. Your turn. There's more to your story than teaching positions. What really brought you to Winnemucca? Madeline looked away, watching an eagle soar over the valley below. I was engaged to be married in San Francisco, she finally admitted. It ended badly. He was a fool, Brax said immediately. A surprised laugh escaped her. You don't even know what happened, don't need to. Any man who let you go was a fool. The simple conviction in his voice moved her more than elaborate declarations might have. William wasn't who I thought he was, she said carefully. When my grandmother died, she left me a modest inheritance, not a fortune, but enough to provide some security. I discovered William was more interested in that than in me. Brax's expression darkened. Did he hurt you? Not physically, she assured him. Just my pride and my trust. When I broke the engagement, there was talk. San Francisco can be a small town in its own way. The teaching position here offered an escape. So Winnemucca is just a temporary refuge, Brax said, a statement rather than a question. Madeline met his gaze. I don't know. I came here thinking it would be, but, he prompted when she didn't continue. But I find myself caring about this place more than I expected to, about the children, the community, she hesitated, about certain people. Something changed in Brax's expression, a softening, a hopefulness that made her heart beat faster. Before he could respond, however, the distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. Storm's coming, he said, looking toward the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. We should head back. They rode more quickly on the return journey, but the storm moved faster. They were still a mile from town when the first heavy drops began to fall. There's a lined shack just ahead, Brax called over the rising wind. We can wait it out there. The small cabin was basic but sound, a single room with a crude fireplace, a narrow cot, a table, and 2 chairs. It was used by Brax's ranch hands when working cattle in distant pastures. Not exactly the Plaza Hotel, Brax apologized as he quickly built a fire while Madeline stood dripping near the door. It's shelter from the storm, she replied, trying not to shiver in her wet riding habit. I'm grateful. Once the fire was crackling, Brax retrieved a blanket from a trunk and handed it to her. You should get out of that wet jacket at least. Madeline hesitated, then nodded. Propriety seemed less important than avoiding pneumonia. She turned her back while removing her sodden outer garments, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders over her blouse. When she turned back, Brax had removed his own wet coat and was hanging it near the fire. His white shirt clung to his broad shoulders, and Madeline quickly averted her eyes. Storm might last a while, he said, glancing out the single window where rain now fell in sheets. Mrs. Holloway will have my hide for keeping you out in this. I'm a grown woman, Madeline reminded him, settling into one of the chairs. I made my own choice to come riding. He smiled at that, taking the other chair. Still, being trapped in a lined shack with the town's schoolteacher isn't exactly going to enhance my reputation as a gentleman. Is that important to you? Your reputation? Yours is, he replied seriously. I wouldn't want to cause you difficulties. Madeline was touched by his concern. I appreciate that, but I've learned that what others think matters far less than what is true. And what is true, Madeline? He asked, his voice low and intent. She met his gaze across the small table, aware that they were balancing on the edge of something significant. The truth is that I came to Winnemucca running away from pain, not expecting to find anything more than temporary refuge, but instead I found. She paused, gathering her courage. I found myself drawn to a life I never imagined, and to a man I never expected to meet. Brax reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I've been alone a long time, he said quietly. Built my ranch, made my place in the community, told myself it was enough. Then you stepped off that train, looking like you'd rather be anywhere else in the world, and suddenly nothing felt the same. Outside, the storm raged, but inside the small cabin, Madeline felt a sense of shelter that had nothing to do with the physical structure around them. When Brax stood and gently drew her to her feet, the blanket fell away, forgotten as he cupped her face in his hands. I'm not a polished man, Madeline. I've lived rough most of my life, but I know my own mind, and my mind's been full of you since the day we met. Brax, she whispered, her hands coming to rest against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. I didn't come here looking for this, neither did I, he admitted, but here we are. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Madeline answered by sliding her hands up to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened into something that sent warmth flooding through her despite her damp clothes. They broke apart breathless, and Brax rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you back to town as soon as the rain lets up." "Yes," she agreed reluctantly. "You should." They remained in the shelter for another hour as the storm gradually subsided. Little was said, but much was communicated in glances and brief touches. By the time they mounted their horses for the ride back to Winnemucca, something fundamental had changed between them. Mrs. Holloway was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her expression a mixture of relief and disapproval. "I was about to send Dr. Miller out looking for you," she informed them. "It's nearly dark, and with that storm—" "My fault entirely, Mrs. Holloway," Brax said, helping Madeline down from her horse. "We got caught in the rain and had to wait it out in a lined shack." The landlady's eyebrows rose, but she simply nodded. "Miss Vance should get into dry clothes immediately. Supper will be ready in half an hour." "I'll see to the horses," Brax said, gathering both sets of reins, but before turning away, he caught Madeline's eye. "Miss Vance, I wonder if you might accompany me to church next Sunday." It was a public declaration of intent, and they both knew it. In a small town like Winnemucca, being escorted to church was tantamount to announcing a courtship. "I would like that very much, Mr. Keane," Madeline replied, ignoring Mrs. Holloway's surprised intake of breath. His smile was warm and private. "Until Sunday, then." Word spread quickly that Braxton Keane was courting the new schoolteacher. Some, like Mayor Wilkins, expressed approval. "About time Keane settled down," he told his wife over breakfast, "and the teacher's a fine woman." Others, particularly certain unmarried ladies and their mothers, were less enthusiastic. Clara Bennett confronted Madeline after church the following Sunday, her pretty face tight with barely suppressed anger. "You've certainly worked fast, Miss Vance. Barely 2 months in town, and already you've caught the most eligible bachelor in the county." "I wasn't aware I was engaged in a competition, Miss Bennett," Madeline replied coolly. "Some of us have waited years for Braxton Keane to show interest," Clara hissed. "Then you arrive from the city with your fancy education and turn his head." "Perhaps Mr. Keane simply knows his own mind," Madeline suggested, unwilling to engage in a public quarrel. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Men often think they know what they want until something newer and more exciting comes along. But novelty fades, Miss Vance. Remember that." The encounter left Madeline unsettled, not because she gave Clara's words any particular credit, but because they touched on her own lingering uncertainties. Was her growing attachment to Brax simply a reaction to her new surroundings? Would it fade once the novelty of frontier life wore off? Winter arrived in earnest by early December, bringing snow that transformed Winnemucca into a landscape of white. The schoolhouse was adequately heated by its large stove, but Madeline found herself concerned about her students who traveled from outlying ranches and farms. "We should cancel school on the worst days," she proposed to the town council. "Some of these children are traveling miles in dangerous conditions. Children miss enough schooling as it is during spring planting and fall harvest," the banker objected. "If we cancel for every snowstorm, they'll never learn their letters." "I'd rather have them alive and illiterate than frozen to death knowing their multiplication tables," Madeline retorted, earning a smile from Brax and a frown from the banker. In the end, a compromise was reached. School would be canceled only when Brax, who knew the territory better than most, deemed conditions truly hazardous. This led to him stopping by the schoolhouse most mornings to report on weather conditions, much to Madeline's private delight. Their courtship progressed steadily through the winter months. Brax joined Madeline and Mrs. Holloway's household for Christmas dinner, bringing gifts that showed his growing understanding of her: a set of fine drawing pencils, having discovered her talent for sketching, several books of poetry, and a delicate silver locket. "It was my mother's," he told her quietly as he fastened it around her neck while Mrs. Holloway busied herself in the kitchen. One of the few things I managed to keep after the war. Madeline touched the locket reverently. Brax, I can't accept this. It's too precious. It belongs with someone I love, he said simply. It was the first time he'd spoken the word, though his actions had been declaring it for weeks. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. I love you too, she whispered, the admission both frightening and liberating. His kiss was brief but fervent, mindful of Mrs. Holloway's imminent return. I have another gift for you, he murmured, but that one will have to wait for the right moment. January brought the harshest weather of the winter. For nearly a week, the temperature remained below freezing, and snow drifted higher than the hitching posts along the main street. School was canceled, and most of the town hunkered down to wait out the cold. On the 7th day of the bitter cold, Madeline was startled by a knock at her door late in the afternoon. Mrs. Holloway had gone to care for a neighbor's sick child, leaving Madeline alone in the boarding house. She opened the door to find Brax stamping snow from his boots, his face reddened from the cold. Brax, what are you doing out in this weather? She exclaimed, ushering him inside. Had to come to town for supplies, he explained, removing his heavy coat. Thought I'd check on you while I was here. That's very kind, but surely it could have waited for better weather. She led him to the parlor where a fire was burning steadily. Some things can't wait, he replied mysteriously, warming his hands by the fire. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Madeline, I've been thinking about the future, about us, her heart quickened. Have you? I know we haven't known each other long by some standards. Back east, people might court for years before making decisions, but out here, life moves differently. He took her hands in his. I love you. I want to marry you if you'll have me. Despite having anticipated this moment, Madeline found herself speechless. Brax mistook her silence for hesitation. I know my ranch isn't what you're used to, he continued quickly. It's comfortable enough, but not fancy. And I know Winnemucca isn't San Francisco. If you need time to consider, yes, she interrupted, finding her voice at last. Yes, Brax, I'll marry you. His face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. This was what couldn't wait, he explained, opening it to reveal a gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. It was meant for Christmas, but it didn't arrive from San Francisco in time. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Madeline felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she'd never experienced before. I love you, she said, watching the firelight catch the facets of the diamond. I never expected to find you, but now I can't imagine my life without you. They were married in the Methodist church on the first Sunday in March, when the worst of winter had passed, but spring had not yet softened the landscape. The entire town attended, even Clara Bennett, who had eventually accepted the inevitable with reasonable grace. Madeline finished the school year as Mrs. Keane, but informed the council she would not return in the fall. I'll be needed at the ranch, she explained, but I'm happy to help find and train my replacement. The mayor nodded understandingly. We figured as much when you got engaged. Truth is, we're lucky you stayed to finish the term. Most new brides would have left us in the lurch. Her last day of teaching was bittersweet. The children presented her with a handmade album containing drawings, pressed flowers, and messages of gratitude. Even the older boys who had initially resisted her authority contributed. You'll come back and visit, won't you, Mrs. Keane? Asked 8-year-old Lucy Miller, the doctor's daughter. Of course I will, Madeline promised, hugging the child. And perhaps someday you'll visit me at the ranch. As the children filed out for the last time, Madeline sat at her desk, looking around the schoolroom that had been her domain for the past year. So much had changed since her arrival in Winnemucca. She had come seeking refuge, a temporary shelter from disappointment. Instead, she had found purpose, community, and a love deeper than she had known was possible. Brax arrived as she was gathering the last of her personal items. Ready to go home, he asked, leaning against the doorframe with the relaxed posture of a man content with his place in the world. Home, she repeated, savoring the word. Yes, I believe I am. They rode together toward the ranch, the evening sun casting long shadows across the land that was now partly hers. In the distance, the mountains stood purple against the darkening sky, and closer at hand, the sagebrush released its pungent scent into the cooling air. "Penny for your thoughts," Brax said as they approached the ranch house, a solid structure of logs and stone that he had expanded over the years. "I was thinking about the night we met," Madeline replied. "How exhausted and uncertain I felt stepping off that train, how I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake coming here." Brax chuckled. "Not the most flattering first impression of your future home." "No," she agreed with a smile. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." They dismounted in the yard as the last light of day faded. Behind them, a ranch hand appeared to take their horses, touching his hat respectfully to Madeline. "Wait by the track," Brax told her, nodding toward the front porch. "I need to speak with Jim about tomorrow's work. I won't be long." Madeline made her way to the porch, watching as lanterns were lit around the property, glowing dots of warmth in the gathering dusk. From here, she could see for miles the pastures where Brax's cattle grazed, the line of cottonwoods marking the creek that provided water, and in the far distance, the faint lights of Winnemucca. This was her home now, this vast landscape so different from the crowded streets of San Francisco or the manicured gardens of Boston. It should have felt alien, intimidating in its openness. Instead, it felt like freedom. Brax joined her as the last light faded from the sky. "Beautiful evening," he observed, standing close beside her. "It is," she agreed, leaning against him as his arm circled her waist. They watched in companionable silence as the lanterns around the property gradually dimmed, ranch hands retiring to the bunkhouse after a long day's work. Finally, only the light from the house behind them remained. "Time to go in," Brax said softly. "It's been a long day for you." She turned to face him, her husband of 3 months who still looked at her as if she were a miracle. "I love you, Braxton Keane." He smiled, the expression visible even in the fading light. "And I love you, Madeline Keane. You'll rest easy tonight." As they entered their home together, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a temporary shelter, but a permanent haven, not in the physical structure of the ranch house, but in the love of the man who had built it, and in the life they would create together in this wild, beautiful land.